Thanks very much, Ahmed. Thanks for the introduction and for the opportunity to give this session. Can everybody see my slides? Good.
Yes, we can.
Good. Okay. Perfect. Great. So I'm going to try to keep this relatively brief, like the didactic portion, so that we can have some time for discussion and questions at the end. And please feel free to ask questions at any point as well if there's something that you're interested in knowing more about. But thank you guys again for taking the time to attend the session, and I hope it's somewhat helpful. So just as an introduction, I think it's important to talk about conceptualizing innovations and discoveries outside of the academic setting. So many of us here are scientists in academia, either trainees or have completed our training. And we typically conceptualize research really within university settings. And I think that more and more we're realizing that a lot of this work can actually be translated and scaled outside of that, and really understanding how things can be commercialized. Even more so, there's an emerging role of physicians and scientists as entrepreneurs. I find that this is something that has been quite common more south of the border in the US, where there's a pretty high prevalence of scientist entrepreneurs and physician entrepreneurs, but it's something that's becoming increasingly common in Canada for a number of reasons, particularly because a lot of the discoveries that we make as scientists are really amenable to commercialization in order for us to scale our influence beyond the academic setting. I'll also bring to your attention, if you're interested, there's something called the Project MedTech, which is, I believe it's Florida based, but they have a podcast that's really specific to medical technology. And every couple of weeks, they interview physician entrepreneurs and scientist entrepreneurs. And it's really nice to kind of hear about different people's stories and journeys towards commercialization of their research or other ideas. And the other thing I'll mention as well is a lot of physicians are actually entrepreneurs by virtue of their work. So, family doctors or dermatologists that are running private practice clinics are essentially running a business as well. And so there are different kinds of ways that you can start a company, whether it's, through research or through, medical device innovation or services in the health industry. But I think one of the important things is to really ask yourself why. I mean, why get started in the first place, and why, look towards commercializing something. And I think that this is really the most important step in the beginning, so that this is something that you will always come back to. And this will allow you to derive meaning in what you're doing as well, if you can always come back to your why. So I'll very, very briefly touch on my experience with Cove. So this is a software platform, and the idea behind this was really, it came out of the gap that we identified in terms of a lack of software tools to process brain data. So EEGs, MEGs, fMRIs that we use in research, both in the private sector and in the public sector. And for the most part, processing this data requires specialized data engineers that often don't have sufficient experience in neuroscience. And so we really wanted to bridge this gap, my co-founder and I. And initially we thought about, a service business where we do analysis for people. But I think the more meaningful thing that we really wanted to do was to deploy a software as a service, or a SaaS, where we can actually create a product that other people can use and benefit from. And I think that we'll talk about this a little bit more, but in terms of the idea, so once you come up with an idea, it's very exciting, but you have to really ask yourself, what gap does this fill? Is this gap important? And who needs this? So who actually needs what your product is, whatever it is? And is that person willing to pay for this? Or that group of individuals, whether it's a direct to customer, to other businesses, like a B2C or a B2B, because that's fundamentally going to determine whether or not you have a prospectively viable business. And this is something that's very, very important to center on. And I think that particularly in the early stages, sometimes it's really easy to get caught up in a really great idea, but then lose sight of the importance of ensuring that there's an actual market for this product. And the other thing is to really ask yourself, what's your story? So the story that you have in terms of your journey, arriving at commercializing something or starting a company is really, it needs to be compelling and authentic. And you're going to tell this story over and over again. This is the story that you're going to share with investors, with prospective clients, and even with people that you're trying to recruit on your team. And so it's really important to have a really genuine narrative for your journey and really be able to share that story. So how can we get started? How can someone get started once you have a little bit of an idea going? Obviously, it's just overcoming that initial hump, which is the case with anything, like starting a new habit or a new diet or anything like that. And so there are multiple parts to it, and it can seem very overwhelming. But really what you have to fundamentally do is identify the problem. What is the problem that you're solving? Because fundamentally, this is the pain point. What people say is the pain point for your prospective clients and your market. So what is their pain point, and how is what you're providing solving that for them? And so you really have to research that problem and understand what is the market for that problem. Is it a particular gender? Is it a particular subgroup of individuals in an age category or something along those lines? Is it everybody? Is it businesses? Is it clients? Is it patients? And you have to understand that market very well through direct research, through talking to people, and really be able to demonstrate what's unique about your solution. And oftentimes there are other solutions to the problem out there. So you may have competitors. Sorry, I can't see if there are any if there are any questions, but I think maybe someone doesn't have their mic off. But you also have to ask yourself if what's unique about your solution, because there are going to be other people out there that are trying to tackle the same problem. Maybe they're already doing it. And so why are you offering something unique that customers are going to want relative to what's already out there? And it's actually really important to understand the competitive landscape, because firstly, I think some people can get discouraged by seeing that other people are doing similar things, but in fact, it really validates that your idea is real. And the other aspect of this is timing. So there might be some competitors out there in the market, but maybe their time is not ideal in terms of market readiness. And I'll come back to this point because I think this is one of the most important things to consider. And then when you're also looking at your competitors, you can generate a competition matrix. And this is a very important exercise very early on when you're getting started, where you ask yourself, what are the other people doing? What are the other companies and groups doing? And how am I offering something different? And actually look at the very specific components. What is our business plan? What's the business plan of this company and other comparable companies? And what is their target market, and how do they market? What's their pricing model and things like that? And again, really coming back to what's unique about your solution and what differentiates you from those potential competitors. So, and then of course you develop your idea. And I think it's important to understand that oftentimes your idea will evolve over time, and it's an iterative process that's going to be informed by your experiences, by people that you speak with, by a lot of trial and error, where you might see that you have a little bit of a good idea, but eventually it might not be the best product market fit, and you continue to iterate that. But I think as long as you come back to your why and the original passion and reason why you started the venture, then it's actually a good thing to continue to develop and adapt as well, and also be very flexible in that regard. So I think this is arguably the most important thing that you need to think about, which is forming your team, because just like most things, just like science and medicine, companies are a team sport. And so you really have to understand who your core team is and formulate that. And I like this picture because it's not just a group of individuals, but it's a group of individuals with a cape that are superstars. And that these are the kind of people that you need to surround yourself with. And I think it's always good to have co-founders who make sense, who share the same vision as you if possible. If you're starting something on your own for, a couple of months or a year or more, you can always bring on late co-founders, provided that they are contributing sufficiently to the company in a really fundamental way to actually merit this title. And also forming essential partnerships. And so you can do this with individuals or even with groups. So here at the University of Toronto, we're very fortunate that we have a lot of access to various accelerators and incubators that can really help you along your journey, even in terms of finding other people. So if you're looking for a co-founder, for example, or you're looking for, someone to fulfill a role in your company. So For example, there's H2I, there's the Hatchery, there's UTest, and a number on campus as well. And I think really forming those partnerships early on are very helpful. The other aspect of your team are advisors. And this is something that is a bit of an unfamiliar concept if you're used to only working exclusively in academia, because of course in academia you have a scientific advisory board, kind of your scientific I guess committee, for example, if for like a master's degree or PhD. But in a company, you actually need a formal advisory board. And these are people that you compensate for giving you their time and expertise. And so the biggest asset that you have in your company initially, obviously, is the company itself. And so you have to be very judicious about how you allocate equity in the company, whether you're compensating advisors via equity versus direct compensation. But the other thing as well is you can have a multitude of informal advisors. And these are people that are just willing to go for coffee with you, that may exist within your network, or someone may know someone else. And I found that there's no shortage of people that are like that. And then you ultimately kind of find who your tribe is and people that you want to surround yourself with. And also you're going to get a huge spectrum of advice. And so you have to really decide what kind of advice you want to go with. And I think it's good to get advice, whether it's field specific advice. So for example, if it's scientific or medical, but also get advice from people who have started businesses before, who have raised capital for their businesses before, and so forth. And then there's also this concept of KOLs, or key opinion leaders, who are individuals who can really help you better understand your market, and help you strategize. So for example, patient advocacy groups and things like that would fall under this category. And then within your team, I think it's important to really form a strong company culture that's positive. And I just put the word resiliency here, not because I think it's the most important quality for a team, but I think it's something that's really important and shouldn't be underestimated when you're starting a venture, because you're just going to have so much failure over and over again on a regular basis that your team really needs to be able to bounce back from that. And I think it's really only possible when you do it as a team. And then the last point is corporate legal support. So I think this is something that kind of may be an oversight early on. There are some mechanisms for you to incorporate a company or to create a corporate entity on your own. But overall, I think this is something that I would recommend having formal legal support to do. And then you kind of need to draft an initial set of documents and agreements, once your company forms and you incorporate. And I think having a good legal counsel is really essential for that. And that forms the foundation for you to hopefully, build strong partnerships with your legal team when you're, for example, fundraising or acquiring customers and things like that. So I was just checking to see if there was anything in the chat, and there isn't, so we're good. Okay. I'm just going to very briefly touch on the concept of intellectual property because I think it's relevant to this audience. So if you're working, for example, in university or hospital like Sunnybrook, and you discover something and you decide, I want to commercialize this, drug that I discovered in my PhD or something like that. This is formally, could be within the bounds of what would be intellectual property that belongs to some extent to the institution. And so you really have to get in touch with your institutional tech transfer office to clarify these things very early on, because intellectual property is ultimately going to be what your company hinges on if you actually have something that's patentable. And so, first of all, you also have to ask and try to get an understanding of what is patentable, because not everything, you can't patent everything. For example, you can't patent code, but you can patent a series of codes that are ultimately, used in a particular sequence for a specific application that's innovative. And then you also have to ask yourself, why do you need a patent? And there are many reasons for that. I'll talk a little bit about the role of having a patent in fundraising, but overall, it's really to be able to protect your intellectual property, recognizing that at a very early stage, you're a small entity. So if anybody infringes on that, you may not have the capital or resources to litigate if necessary. But it definitely creates something for you to own and forms the foundation of your company. And then I think this is something that many people can do on their own, but you can also learn about as well, and partner with other individuals that can help and groups that can help you with this. But to be able to conduct a patent search to really get an understanding of what's already out there. So what have people patented? And so, for example, when we started, we actually found that there were a lot of very similar patents to the sequences that we were hoping to apply. And this was, again, something that I felt was a positive because it demonstrated that, people are doing this and it's patentable. But you need to ensure that what you're doing is sufficiently different or sufficiently differentiates yourself from what's already out there. And then the role of patents in fundraising. So first of all, the patent process in and of itself is very capital intensive. It's really expensive depending on where you're filing patents, whether it's Canadian versus international, and there's different functions of each. Oftentimes, if you're raising, if you're raising money in the company, investors like to see that you have some sort of patent in the process, or you have something patented, or you're just mindful of the importance of protecting your intellectual property. I just want to also say that intellectual property is not only patents. It's a spectrum, that ranges from trade secrets and so forth, things that may not necessarily need to be patented. So you don't always have to patent something. But I think that it does play an important role in the fundraising process. And if you really want to understand if whatever you're doing needs to be patented or not, it's good to try to consult with people out there. At U of T, they're really good free modules on understanding intellectual property and patents, and again, the spectrum of intellectual property. And then also just getting in touch with groups like, for example, Venture Lab, that offer completely free advice on this topic. And I think it's something that's very important to consider early on. I do have a question in the chat, so I'll address this now. The question is, could a gene signature indicative of poor glioblastoma prognosis constitute IP that is patentable? Yeah, so I think that's a really good question, and I think that a lot of things can be patentable, but it's hard to say, without getting into too many specific details. But I think this is a very good question that can be posed to a patent expert, either at U of T or beyond that, because the answer really depends on what else is out there, and how this was derived, for example, and if it's replicatable and its novelty and so forth. But I think that's a very good question. So I'm going to touch on fundraising. I know that, not every, many people in this group are still very early on in their journeys, but I still do think that it's something that's relevant. Sorry, I just have another question here about patents, so I'll address that first. So if a patent is filed and issued in Canada, will it be honored internationally as well? What are the differences in protection based on where they're filed? So that's also a good question. And don't quote me on this, but I believe not. I think that a patent in Canada does not preclude someone outside of Canada from doing something similar or identical to what you're doing. And then you wouldn't necessarily have the kind of the legal leg to stand on that. So there are pros and cons to patenting worldwide, depending on what your market is, but you may only really need to patent in Canada and the United States if that's your target market. And then if someone, for example, in Europe is doing something similar, it's irrelevant because, maybe they're targeting that market as well. But very good questions and considerations. So I'll move on to fundraising very briefly. And as I mentioned, although some of you guys might be very early on, I think these are still important concepts to understand. So very early on, you need to create something called a pitch deck, which is basically just a term for a set of PowerPoint slides that should be done as nicely as possible, that really explain and detail your business. So what's the problem? What's the solution? Explain your company, explain your business model, explain who you are and why you're doing what you're doing. And so there are a lot of, there's no shortage of templates out there for pitch decks online. I think one of the most famous is from Sequoia Capital, which I highly recommend. And looking at creating a pitch deck is very important because anyone that you want to talk to almost about anything is going to say, send me your deck. And this needs to be a set of slides that's non-confidential, that you can send this to, prospective investors. And ultimately, you might also create a deck for prospective clients as well. And within that also falls the business plan. So I think that it's important to formulate some sort of business plan. And I won't talk about this in too much detail, but I don't think a business plan is something that needs to be innovative. I think your product needs to be innovative, but business plan, there's a finite number of business plans, and you can see what kind of other businesses exist out there, and you can have a similar business model. And I think that you may deviate from your business plan, but it's a really important exercise to demonstrate that you understand some of the fundamentals of the cash flow in your business and what kind of modeling is needed in order to better understand the business model itself. There are many sources of funding depending on the company stage. So there's a substantial amount of grant funding that you can tap into, both provincial and federal grants from the government that are very dedicated to health tech. There are a lot of awards as well, which are non-dilutive funding. And what that means is that these are awards and you're not giving up any equity in exchange for receiving that funding. There's also this concept of bootstrapping, which many companies can do if you're generating funds and you just reinvest that back into the company. And at a very early stage, you can look towards angel investors who are typically high net worth individuals or groups that typically do invest in early stage companies. So they do take on higher risks, for checks on the order of $50,000 to $100,000 or less, something along those lines. And there are a number of groups in Toronto. Actually, there are a lot of groups in Toronto and in Ontario in general, for example, Halo Health, that are very interested in investing specifically in health-related technology. There are also loans. So some banks will loan you money that you need to pay back at certain terms, which are typically favorable, but it's still debt. And I think it's important to inquire with your advisors and really reflect within your team if it makes sense for you to take on debt at a very early stage in your company. I think that there are very few examples where that's probably favorable, but most likely not. But companies banks, for example, like BDC and Silicon Valley Bank are known to provide loans to companies. And then there's, of course, kind of like the venture capital PE world, which typically this is when you're raising, in the seed funding stage or, Series A, you're not super early, but still early. And this is essentially where you're getting these venture capital firms to invest in your company, and you're doing this in exchange for equity in the company. And this is important to be very careful about for a number of reasons. So depending on the amount of the investment or the terms that you negotiate with the investor, they may want, if they're giving you a substantial amount of funding, they may want, for example, a seat on your board of directors to have a say in how your company, operates, because they have a significant amount of funds that are invested in that company, and that may or may not be in your favor. So it's really important for you to find strategic investors. So I don't think all funds are equal. I think that it's really important to find people who believe in what you're doing and can help you with your business development. And then I just put a little asterisk here in that not all businesses should be unicorns. So like venture capital in and of itself is a business model. So these types of firms invest in a bunch of different companies, and they're banking on the fact that maybe one of those companies is going to really become a unicorn and become $100 million enterprise at minimum, and the rest are all going to fail, which is accurate. But not all companies really need to be at that level, and they may kind of push you to go to that point. Whereas, if you're a well-functioning business and a reasonably sized entity, and you're able to generate revenue and profit and pay your staff, that might be good enough for whatever your business is. So I think just recognizing your business model is also very important. And I think surrounding yourself with good advisors will help you in this regard as well. I think it's also important to understand the general funding climate and be somewhat, literate in what's happening from like an economics perspective. So this is currently not a very good time for fundraising, and the tech sector is really not doing well. So I don't know if any of you guys have been following this stuff in the news. But for example, one of the most kind of successful Canadian companies, Clearco, in the financial tech area, they let go of a substantial amount of their staff. And then more recently, another 25% of their staff was let go. And their CEO, who's very famous, who's a very famous female entrepreneur in Canada, Michelle Romano, also stepped down and now transitioned to as co-chairman of the board. But this is an example of a company that they were able to raise over $700 million and they still weren't profitable yet. So their funding climate was very different than what it is now. And so I think that just being aware of those things, maybe you can wait a couple of months if you can potentially, tap into grants, bootstrapping, and so forth, and see what makes sense for your company as well. I just want to make the point that people invest in people. So this is all about making relationships and creating relationships between other people. And so if people really believe in you and believe that you can execute on your plan, you'd be more likely to get funding than if there's no, chemistry or dynamic there. And I think that's an important aspect to consider as well. But overall, I think just on this very important topic, it's important to have a very solid plan. Once you are ready to fundraise, you need to have a very sound understanding of how the funds are going to be used, and specifically why these funds are needed to really accelerate your business or scale your operations. You need to really know these figures very intimately well and be able to explain to this and speak to this. So I have a number of questions in the chat. So just give me 1 second. I'll address these questions. So the first question, is there a patent library for specific topics, or should we just Google if something similar is out there? So there's actually Google Patents. So that's like one way that you can patent search. So it's not just a regular Google search, but there's Google Patents. And then there are other more exclusive avenues that are typically more available to patent agents and patent lawyers as well. Question from Sangeeta. Does there any academic support system available for non-academic professionals or people working in industry during early stage of medical technology startup? Yeah, so that's a good question as well. I can't say I can speak much to this because I don't have any experience in that domain, but I do know that there's a concept of, for example, intrapreneurs, where people working within a particular company can actually have support to do innovative things outside of that company. And so that's something that you may want to look into in the particular company or industry that you're working in. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So, sorry, one more question that just came in. What happens when an investor initially agrees to purchase and is interested in the concept, but when the product is actually available, they back out and decide not to spend money on it? Okay, so that's a really good question. So I'm just going to repeat that one more time because I read it quickly. But what happens when an investor initially agrees to purchase, but is interested in the concept, but when the product is available, they back out and decide not to spend money on it? So basically, this is going to happen, and it's going to happen a lot. So thankfully, I haven't been down that road yet, but I'm sure it's going to happen to me too. And essentially, I think it's just important to be prepared for that possibility. And so investors might say, yeah, sign me up, and you've had a number of meetings and things go well, and you think that they're going to invest in you, and then they back out at the last minute. It can happen a lot. So I think you just have to try to hedge your bets and hope for the best, and recognize that this is a huge possibility and is actually not uncommon. Okay. Almost done here. So just speaking very broadly about challenges and rewards. So I think a lot of people think that, when you start some sort of venture, it's great because you work for yourself and you don't have to answer to anyone, but actually there's a tremendous amount of accountability, and you have many bosses, so to speak, which primarily fall under the category of your investors and your board of directors. So the people that are actually, funding your enterprise, and also your customers. So you really need to provide something that's really quality in terms of a product to your customers, which goes into my second point, because ultimately this is what fuels your business. And so it takes a lot of effort to ensure that your product is really meeting the standards that your customers need and want, so that they can continue that they can continue to be your customers, and you can continue to expand your client base. And generally speaking, the highs are not as frequent as the lows. And this is just a picture here of, I don't know if you guys know who this is. This is Novak Djokovic. He's the world #1 tennis player. face palming here because he's also, you know, like every athlete has experienced their fair share of lows. There are many obstacles and failures, you know, even like what some of you have mentioned, you know, people back out from funding. Potential clients say that they're interested, and then you don't hear from them again. And you know, things happen, and so it's not uncommon. And I think it's also really good to surround yourself with people who are potentially doing similar things so that you can commiserate, because I think it's really important to have a community as well. But it's also rewarding to start something and watch it grow. You know, for the most part, the statistics are that most companies do fail. But, you know, maybe yours won't. And so I think, you know, just seeing that you can get over that hump, start something, grow something is actually very rewarding as well. And this is a picture of Djokovic winning one of his many, I think 7 Wimbledon titles. So final thoughts. I think the last thing I wanted to mention, as I kind of alluded to in the beginning, is that timing is everything. So timing is really important, not just in terms of timing, you know, getting an understanding of the market, but in understanding and deploying your product or service, and recognizing whether or not your market is ready for it. I would say one of the most famous examples of this is Airbnb, where, you know, famously a lot of many big investors had passed over the idea of Airbnb, you know, saying there's no way that people are going to let, you know, random strangers live in their house or rent out a room in their house. But it actually, it was launched at a time when there was an economic recession, and people were looking for alternative sources of funding and were open to these kinds of things. And conversely, you know, people were also looking for alternate lodging options, you know, beyond hotels, and the timing for that worked really well. And there were many examples of this as well. And so I think, you know, having a really good understanding of your market and your customers is very, very essential. There are a couple of books that I think may be worthwhile just even kind of getting summaries for, or giving them a read, or many of them are also available as audiobooks if you'd be interested. The first one that I listed here, Breakthrough, is actually good if you don't even have an idea, like if you're just kind of thinking about this topic, because it's a very kind of open-ended book. And the other 3 I think are really good as well. Like, they're excellent books just about startups and startup philosophy in general. I put an asterisk next to 0 to 1 because I do think it's a must read for anyone who's embarking upon some sort of entrepreneurial journey. So with that, I'll end there. Thank you guys very much for your attention. I'd be happy to take questions. I know that there are a number of questions in the chat, so maybe I can address those first. And then if anyone wants to ask questions, I'd be happy to answer as well.
Thank you very much, Nardine. That was an excellent talk with a great overview on the healthcare entrepreneurship and startup strategy. I have seen a lot of questions and interest in intellectual property and patenting, and thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and insights on the topic. Just wanted to mention that we have an IP workshop taking place on February 9th. The registration site for that event is not live yet, but it should go live by next week. And again, just before I open up for questions, a quick reminder again that this session is being recorded, and by staying, you are giving us consent to record and archive this video.
I think there's just actually one question, and then I can take other questions. So the question is, why do you think most businesses fail? So that's a really good question, actually. And there's no shortage of you know, YouTube videos on this topic. You know, I think Elon Musk has one. I think Sam Altman has one. It's like, you know, why do most businesses fail? And it's definitely multifactorial. I think one of the reasons why most businesses fail that I've seen, you know, from my reading and experience in that part, is that timing. I think timing is really important. So poorly timing a very good idea, even if it's a great idea and a great team, I think that's one of the number one reasons. And then I think also the team is very important. I think it's really necessary to have a very strong group of individuals who believe in the mission and vision of the company, and are working towards it. So, you know, and then the other thing as well is just not really understanding your market, not understanding your customers, not providing, you know, quality products to your customers so that you can sustain your business. I would say those are among the top reasons why businesses fail. But of course, it's multifactorial. Lots of questions coming in. Feel free to just like turn on your mics and ask questions. That might be easier too, just so that I can understand them well. And it would be great to see you guys as well. Does anyone have any questions that they want to ask on the video or on the audio?
Hi, Miss Nadine. Can I ask my question?
Definitely.
Thank you. It's my joy and honor to join your seminar again. I actually would like to have your insight and input about late co-founders. And I have heard a lot of like video about like the recommendation for late co-founder and the fact that we should be generous when we are like giving the equity. But I would like to have your opinion as well.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. And thanks, Narjis, for the question. So, I mean, I think that there are obviously industry standards for these things, you know, if you're bringing on a chief technology officer or whatever, but it's very hard to talk about, equity in general, because especially when you're trying to quantify it, it's a bit of a nebulous concept because, you know, 10% might sound like a lot, but 10% of nothing is still nothing, right? So it depends on what you have and what your partner is contributing to that, and the value that they bring as well. So I would argue that it's important to not just consider what you're giving up, but what you're getting as well, and how that's actually going to help you accelerate your business.
I see. Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Nardin. My question is maybe for both of you and Dr. Nasser. And you said about something like working with some businesses, B2B patterns, but when our idea or our companies come to work with some regulations, health regulations, or rules in the healthcare system, there is some complexity over there because some things need actually kind of political negotiations. And so how do you, what do you recommend for solving this problem?
I just want to make sure I understand the question. So is the question around like regulatory requirements?
Yeah, when you're not allowed to do some things with your idea, with your company.
I'm not sure I fully understand.
I mean, when your idea needs some in terms of those health regulatory, restrictions, you need to lobbying, you need to have some, upper levels, higher officials permission for you to do something. For example, you want to work with some different hospitals. Your idea needs to have a mix of hospitals, but each of these hospitals have their own governance system. I'm not sure if I'm clearly defining my problem. It's actually my own problem. And I do not know how to solve it because I need to kind of lobbying with some political, officials in this, and I do not know how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe Dr. Nassef, if you have anything to share.
Dr. Samuel, I'm not really sure I understand the question. I'm not sure if you're asking how can you generate clinical evidence to gain regulatory clearance, or how you can navigate that through the clinical system. I'm not sure if I understand you correctly.
Not navigate anything that might interfere with their own regulations, but not interfere. I mean, interfere to the good. I don't want to take much time of this session. Maybe I send you a message and make it more clear for you. Thank you.
Sure, but also to your point, I think that, obviously regulatory affairs is really important. So that's a huge aspect of what you're doing. And so that might be more relevant, to you, depending on your particular company than it would be, for example, for a software company, as long as you're not, trying to claim any diagnostic or trying to make any diagnostic claims or something like that. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like this is a legitimate hurdle. And my advice would be to kind of try to seek advice from people who have gone through a similar problem, because in my kind of limited experience, I think that there's no problem that you're going to encounter that nobody else has before. So, you know, you can try to seek advice from people that have been there and kind of see what their strategy has been as well.
Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Samuel. I have a question regarding one of your slides. So first few slide you mentioned one was getting started, and there you mentioned identify the problem, research the problem, and what's your unique solution. And then next slide you talked about developing your idea. So when somebody is getting started level, that means do they have to have a concept and prototype ready and provisional patent file? Is that stage, is the getting started stage?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I would argue not. I think just getting started is just getting the ball rolling. That's really all it is, because all of these things take a significant amount of time. And then, you know, the reason why I actually had the developing your idea slide afterwards is because, you know, it takes time to develop your idea as well. And you may pivot from your original business model. So I think that it's good to just kind of get started, and you may have nothing yet. You may literally just have just a pitch deck. And that's not uncommon, but you just kind of get started and get moving, and you try to see where things go. And in tandem, you're also developing your idea as well. And trying to really iterate it and improve it because your goal is to have the best product market fit that you can in order to really best serve your customer base.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I do have a question for you, Nardine. It's more specific to, you know, AI and big data in healthcare. I think the promise that comes with AI by making, you know, devices more reliable, accurate, and automated is generating a growing interest in finding new ways to integrate AI. But I think, and I've seen a lot of researchers and scientists are concerned about this integration because it's a new paradigm for them. And there is quite uncertainty on when AI is the right answer. So how do you know that this is the right application for you? Or how do you assess the added value of artificial intelligence, in your opinion?
Yeah, thanks for that question. We struggle a lot with this as well with Cove, because I think like AI is just sexy. Like everybody loves to like talk about it and use it. And there are these like, you know, investment firms that are specific for AI in medicine. And it's just like, what does that even mean? And so I think that, you know, it's important to try to, your goal is really to try to come up with the best solution for your problem that might require some sort of automation, you know, which may require machine learning and you know, derivatives of artificial intelligence and things like that, but maybe not. And so you have to ask yourself, like, do I need AI tools to answer or address my problem? And that's actually like a pretty dichotomous yes or no. And then the other thing as well is what you're proposing, like, you know, what's the reception going to be? I know that there's obviously some people in medicine that are huge champions of, you know, the use of AI, and some are not, because they're worried, thinking, you know, well, it's going to replace radiologists and pathologists and all this kind of stuff. But, you know, realistically, it can't, because first of all, you can't replicate human intelligence. And second of all, even I think maybe at best you can make humans more efficient, but you still need some quality control. Like that's never going to go away. And so I think that's something that is really important for people to understand, because I've seen a lot of companies that are like, we're just going to automate this aspect of medicine and we don't need people anymore. Well, it sounds like a great business model, but it's actually not going to happen, because there's no QC at the other end of it. And you need humans for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I do have another question. I know you touched upon some of the funding, you know, sources on the fundraising slide, but I'm just curious, what funding sources were you able to tap into at the early stage? Just curious if you can share anything with the audience, especially people who are looking to raise capital for their companies at a very early stage of development.
Definitely. So we are not yet venture funded, and that's very intentional. I think we really wanted to try to bootstrap as much as possible, because that made sense for our company. And we're probably going to be looking towards a fundraise later in the year. But in the meantime, we do need some element of working capital for the company, and we've benefited a lot from U of T based grants. Being in the neuroscience area, there are a lot of brain specific grants. So for example, we got a large grant from the Ontario Brain Institute, but I know that there are comparable organizations and, the cardiac sphere or, in oncology and so forth that provide innovation grants. One thing we also haven't tapped into yet, but we're looking into are, things like MyTax, which I know a lot of people may be familiar with. But these are sources of funding, to pay someone as a salary in order to work in your company through an academic collaboration. So that's what we've been doing so far, and bootstrapping, and it's been working for us. But eventually we need to scale, and I think once you reach that inflection point, that's when you have to really look towards venture capital.
Awesome. Good luck.
I hear it's not a great process, so it's very intensive. It's a lot of work, but if it needs to be done, I mean, I think you have to do whatever it takes to to really support your business and help it thrive.
I know. Yeah. It's a very challenging but a rewarding process at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly.
Any more questions from our audience?
I have a question about like research-based startups and getting grants for doing research. How do you demonstrate that you have a business model? Because my background is in research, so I get feedback about business on startups, but do you have any advice on how do you address scale up, that kind of questions and concerns from grant applications?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, being in a research institute, you're very well poised to try to commercialize discoveries, particularly being here at U of T. I think we're very lucky in that regard. So, if you have something that you think is really innovative and there are grants that could potentially support you, which there are a lot of, for example, sorry, I should have also mentioned, we didn't apply for this grant, but there is an opportunity through the Ontario government. I think it's the Ontario Centre for Innovation, and they fund projects that are academic projects in collaboration with a company. So say, you start a company and you want to do some research for that company in that lab. That's an example of a government funded grant that you can apply for. But it sounds like your question is, how can I actually demonstrate that there's a business there? And my advice would be to first of all, just get started, just put something to paper, put something together, just think about who a team could potentially be. It may not be anyone, it may just be you in the beginning, and that's totally fine too. And then maybe reach out to some of the accelerators on campus that can help you develop your plan, and see if, what you're proposing could be a viable business model. And of course, it's very different depending on what industry you're targeting. Like if you're saying, it depends what your research is. Like, are you researching drug development? Is it a therapeutic? Is it a medical device? Is it some sort of, prognostic, I don't know, tool, something along those lines, right? I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any more questions?
If you were starting again, what would you do differently?
Thanks so much for that question. So it's hard to say because I feel like I'm still starting, but I think that there are always things that you can do differently. I don't have I don't have any major regrets yet, but that doesn't mean I haven't made a lot of mistakes. I think that it's important to surround yourself with people who can help you keep going. So, I could say, I wish I did 30 more demos in December, so that I could have gotten another client by now, but, I didn't do that. And that's okay. I think that I was able to kind of focus my efforts elsewhere. So I think it's just important to really, be very intentional about the journey as well. And even if you make some mistakes along the way, like that's okay. That's part of your journey too. I know that didn't really answer your question specifically because I can't really come up with like an answer, but that's my philosophy to that approach.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any more questions? Okay. Well, I can ask one last question, and I know you kind of answered it through the presentation, but maybe a good summary and a takeaway from that session. What are some of the common missteps that you've seen innovators do early on in the innovation process?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think that one of the most important things that you need to do is figure out this intellectual property piece. You need to figure out like, what is your institution entitled to? What are you going to claim intellectual property for? And really get started on that. I think that, people kind of take that step for granted. Actually, as I mentioned, it costs a lot of money. And so that's why people just kind of blow it off. Once you actually file a patent, it could be on the order of $100,000. So, but having said that, there are a lot of firms that are willing to provide in-kind services, at least in the early stages, to kind of help you navigate that. And the reason why I think that's an important misstep early on is because, again, understanding what your intellectual property is gonna help you define what it is that you're selling for your company. Again, it doesn't necessarily need to be something that's patented. There are other forms of intellectual property, but that's something that people really need to understand. And then the other kind of misstep that I think is a pretty common pitfall is not understanding basic legal, corporate legal matters, and just saying okay, the lawyer's going to deal with that. You actually need some startup 101 legal stuff, and you need to be well versed in that, because not all lawyers are the same, and you really need to understand, if you get your lawyer to say, here's a shareholders agreement, which is this sounds like jargon, but it's it's an agreement. It's a document that really outlines the terms for which people own shares in your company. Typically in the beginning, it's just you or you and your co-founder. And then you start issuing shares thereafter. You need to understand the aspects of that agreement, and just saying that, and other similar kind of corporate documents, saying that okay, the lawyer is going to take care of this. That's not good enough, because that's where things can really go wrong, down the road. And you need to, my philosophy is, you really need to build a solid foundation in these domains so that you can avoid these problems later on. So I would say those are kind of two of the most important things very early on. And that's not necessarily saying, pitfalls of why your company is going to fail, but pitfalls of things that people might overlook because they might not think, is important for them at the time.
Yeah, and you covered many other important things during your presentation, like the team, like the getting the need right, or identifying the problem, and doing the right research and asking the right questions early on before you pursue with your journey. Thank you again so much for that, Nardine. I'm assuming we don't have any other questions from the audience, so I will end the session now. Thank you again, Nardine, for taking the time to educate our students and community. It was a pleasure to have you with us tonight. Thanks for our attendees for joining us this evening. Please note that our next lecture is taking place next week on Thursday, January 26th at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And our guest speaker will be Nick Kurluk, who will be giving us an exciting talk about market research and analysis. So please mark your calendars and register for your event through our website, sunnybrook.ca/Medventions. Thanks again, and see you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks again, Ahmed.
Thank you, Nardine.
Have a great evening. Bye.
See you.